Hey everybody, welcome to the SaaS Founder Show. It's Tony Zayas, joined with Andy Helko on the show where we talk to some really interesting SaaS founders, hear all about their journey along the way. So this week, we have an interesting founder joining us. But before we dive in, Andy, I would like to find out, after 19 years of business, what is your favorite part of the hiring process?
My favorite part of the hiring process, I would say being able to present that offer. I mean, man, how fantastic it is to get through the process, have decided, found somebody great, and say, I want you to be part of our team.
Yeah, that's cool. And I like that I got the chuckle out of you because the hiring process is typically not fun for many people. It's challenging, it's hard. And so with that, I'm going to bring on Jared Rosenthal. He's the founder and CEO at STAFFGLASS. And it's kind of cool. Their tagline is actually hire fearlessly. That they have employee onboarding software that powers sound decisions. So Jared, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jared, we'd love to hear, I gave the short version of what STAFFGLASS is all about. So I would love to hear your version, explain to us what you guys do.
Sure. So, we actually started about 11 years ago as an employer-based drug testing company, drug testing, background checks. And we got early on pretty into DNA testing for individuals and individual drug testing. And over time, we sort of pivoted towards software pretty hard. Kind of figured out that these kind of services were much more efficiently provided via a better technology than just going out and doing the test. We started out, the way the company started, I bought a used RV and we would pull up to businesses and do on-site drug testing and, hire some nurses for the day or some techs and just, collect urine and drop it off at a lab. It was very physical, very hands-on. But it really allowed me to learn the business, but I also saw some opportunities where we could do this over the phone or we can do this via software that would be much more efficient and provide a lot more value. And we pivoted real hard to that and fast forward to the launch of STAFFGLASS. STAFFGLASS is sort of a wraparound for the Health Street services that goes into other parts of that hiring process. We serve about 20,000 small, medium-sized businesses, and they were asking for things that are not just at the point of hire, but all those other fun parts of the hiring process that you were referring to earlier, the recruiting and the interviewing and the up to the point of onboarding and then beyond. So we have a vision for a fuller suite of services from going north to the point of when you first think of what job you want to hire for, and writing a job description, posting it, looking for people, interviewing them, identifying them, evaluating them, storing resumes, job applications, all the way to, okay, I want to hire you now. Let's do the background check. Let's get you in for your drug test, and then start and sign some, e-sign documents. Do the whole thing digitally, and that's the longer term vision for STAFFGLASS. But that's what we've begun.
I'm kind of curious how difficult it was to build a software, within a business. So you said you had a very physical business.
Yeah.
And I think for some people, the challenge is like, how do we build this other revenue line and build a software and grow that while we've got this other part of the business that's completely different?
It's very difficult because, anytime you take away from one, you put into the other and you're always questioning, am I losing money? Should I be doing this? I was making enough money to put food on the table yesterday, but now I'm going to take an hour out of the day to do something else. But it changed for me with one very simple moment. They would call when I first started. Someone would call an hour away. I was in Manhattan. Someone called the far side of Brooklyn and they need a drug test. And I would drive there and say it's going to be $100 or whatever, drive out there and do the test and then drive it back in and get another call and go somewhere else. And then one day a guy called and he's in Boston. And I said, I really want to make this $100. How am I going to do it? So I researched it and I figured it out, and I figured out how to do it through software, not my own software, but using what was available. And I got him set up, and I had to pay somebody $10 to do some of the work for me. And I said, hung up the phone and took the payment. I said, man, That was a lot easier, right? That was way
Mhm.
easier. So I said, there's got to be more to that. That's a scalable opportunity, and that's what I was looking for all along. But it was very apparent to me at that moment that if I could build that side of the business, if I could build a network of clinics, and I could build a call center for staff to take these calls, and a marketing program to drive the business, long term, it's going to be much better. In the meantime, I was still, for many years, still driving in the middle of the night, picking up the phone for truck accidents and going out to the scene and giving breathalyzers, but using that time on the road to think a lot about how to build it. But it is a difficult transition. Anytime in a business, when you're starting it yourself, every time you want to get to the next level, it's extremely hard because you have to give up what you're already doing. You have to pay someone to do what you were, earning profit on before. You got to take money out of your own profit. And oftentimes you have to stop doing what you were good at and what got you there to take on something that you might not be so good at. And it's challenging. It's hard. You got to get through that multiple times, multiple levels, if you want to really grow.
Now, did you have a technology background or no coding or anything like that?
You know what? I bought a book. What I did in 2010 when I first started the business is, after running it on spreadsheets for several months, I was looking for a software that could have no ceiling on it, but at the same time that I could learn myself. And I found it as a program called FileMaker, which has been around for a long time. And what I liked about it was I could figure it out. It took me about 6 weeks of reading this book to just get out of the gate. But once I did, and I set it up, believe it or not, it's still 11 years later, we're still running on that same platform. And that was what I was looking for, and it was one of the best decisions I ever made in business, was find something that was small and allowed me as a small person with no coding background to figure out, but could that I could learn more. And each year I learned more. Each year I was able to do more. And there's really, like I said, there's almost no ceiling on it. It could be powering, and it does power many professional organizations as well.
Jared, I'd be curious as to, with running, the other business and having ideas of ways that you can improve process, using technology. How did those ideas start to bubble up? And when did you know that it was time to say, okay, yeah, let's build this to launch StaffGlass?
Yeah, well, I say another one of those really defining moments was getting to a level, or seeing for myself a level of technology that it was so apparent how powerful this was. And I'll explain it briefly. Somewhere in there, 5 years in, we had a call center running. We're taking calls, but still, it was a very manual process. So my staff would get almost like running a travel agency. You hear what the person wants, then you check this airline, you check that airline, you go back and forth with the client. There's several minutes on the call, and you book it, and you find the lab, you find a technician, all those steps. And then I somehow figured out that I could make the system connect all of those dots and tie it all together with almost no human interaction whatsoever. Almost like converting a travel agency to something like an Expedia, right? And I got a programmer on the phone that I had been working with a little bit, and I made him explain to me what an API was. And I spent hours with him. I said, just tell me what this is. How do I do this? And I really had no business trying to connect an API. But with his help, I finally got it to work. And one of the things we did in that process is we would get an authorization code from a lab, then you would cut and paste it and put it into our system, right? And when I finally set it up and I pushed this button, and within a blink of an eye, the code popped into that field, it was like ecstasy. It was like, wow, we didn't have to do any of those steps. It just worked. And I just saw that I got to do this more and more and make this work, because it can be that 10-minute phone call can be a web interaction that has no cost to us beyond, the software side. And that was really a huge thing. And I just never stopped from there.
We talk to a lot of our audience as founders and people that are trying to start businesses. I'm kind of curious for those other folks out there that are, trying to teach themselves and dive into it. And, and really, I think what's great that the people that hack it, they just figure it out and they make things connect and work together. What would be your insight for those folks of like, how do you go about that when you're kind of starting in this different place and you're trying to learn and build at the same time?
Yeah. Attitude is a huge component of it. I mean, you have to be relentless. Especially if you have a brain like mine, where it takes hearing something 10 times for it to sink in. But you got to allow enough time for those 10 times, and you have to believe that you can get through it. And, you have to be reasonable. You just can't take on every tech project that you want. So it's important to have all the data points and be able to assess what really has a return on the investment in your time. And you have to know when you need outside people to do things, when it's worth investing in them. But those things are all very difficult, especially if you are in my type of context. And my context is it's just me as the owner, and so every decision is a lot more important for because it's coming out of it's coming out of the profit, or it's coming out of your savings, or it's really important. So you don't have the ability to say, hey, we got investors, we got millions of dollars, we could run in the red for several years. So it's a lot harder and it's a lot more intense, and it's important to know how to deal with that.
Yeah, I love that word, relentless. I think that's such a big piece of anybody that's trying to start a business is, just keep going after it, right?
Yeah, they're little things. I remember one of those early times was every morning one of my staff would come in and fax certain paperwork to the clinics. At maybe 10 appointments for the day, and she would fax the paperwork. And I spent an entire weekend trying to get the system to automatically, wake up in the morning and fax us, because every now and then she'd be late, or sometimes she would forget. And so it's a human process. It's never going to be 100%. And I said to myself the whole weekend, what am I wasting my time? She can just come in and do it. It's not that big of a deal. It's not worth 20 hours of my time. But once I set it up, years later, it still gets up every morning and faxes, and we never miss any. And yes, it is worth it because it adds up over time. But I couldn't have done it if I didn't have that, feeling of being relentlessly trying to make it, just being inspired by the opportunity that it could actually lead to something bigger and better.
Yeah, it's cool.
So, Jared, I would be curious to hear what the MVP looked like. When you had this idea, you decided to turn it into a product. What was the first, what did the MVP look like, and how did you get those first customers?
Okay, so StaffGlass, we started from a point of already having Health Street running for 10 years. So we had the customers, and we were able to move people in and beta test and that sort of thing. So maybe the question is more appropriate for the Health Street situation, and that MVP. Again, starting a business, you can do it in many different ways. If you're going to go out and get investors and pitch an idea, that's a whole different ball of wax than saying, all right, I'm going to use my savings and try to make it on my own and build it, improve it. I think a lot of people have this idea that starting something, an MVP, is sort of like come up with that idea that nobody thought of, that dream where I'm going to invent something and it's just going to take off and nobody ever thought of it before. That's one way to do it, but it's a really long shot, and I messed up a couple businesses that I started before, kind of blew my life savings doing things like that. So this time I was not going to make that mistake, and I was going to be more conservative in my approach to what I was going to do and figure out innovations along the way. So that's another way to start a business. I got into this drug testing thing by saying, let me do the hardest thing that is within this business where there's already a market for it. I don't have to worry about going out and evangelizing and starting a new market for something, which is very expensive and very hard. Let me get into a market that already exists, but fill a need that was very hard, which was, answering the phone at 3 a.m. when the train slides off the tracks and driving 2 hours and doing the breathalyzer drug test. And that was a foot in the door. It was a hard way to start, and it was very physical, but it was exciting to me because I'd be driving and saying, "Hey, they're really paying me for this." One time they put me on a boat in New York Harbor to go out and test another boat that had run aground the rocks, and the U.S. Coast Guard was there, and I'm in the middle of New York Harbor in the middle of the night looking at the stars, saying, "I'm getting paid to be out. This is great," and I did it myself. So the MVP was like, "All right, really, do the hardest thing that you can, that you think the other people aren't doing. Sometimes you even get paid better for that because it's harder. It's harder to find other people doing it. And then establish your relationship, establish your clientele, and then try and move into the sort of the higher volume, better long-term scalable kind of areas."
Yeah, I think we've heard that story from a number of founders that, they really validated the market first with a very hands-on physical business, and then just innovated until they got to the point that they had a platform. So how much have you shifted, fully the software versus that physical business? Has it been a wholesale, shift to it, or are you still kind of mixed or running both?
It's 99% towards the technology side of it. And why? Because it's just a much better business. It just is. It's much harder to build that clientele on a national basis rather than hang a shingle and have people walking in the door. But it's just a much more effective way to run it. You're more in control. And, and then what we've done is established a network of collectors, of folks that maybe started out like I started out, that are in that stage, that are doing the on-site, and then we farm out the work to them if we need somebody to do it. But this way we can scale. If you're by yourself, no matter what you're doing, if you're doing it yourself, you're limited by the number of hours in the day. You just are, right? But if you're doing something where, let's say it's a website, or a call center would be the next level, and then a website even beyond that, where you can, if I could take one call myself, I could take 10 calls with, a staff, and I could take 100 people on the website, and it goes on from there. So it's scalability in the end. If you want to, if you're dreaming big, like I am and always will be, scalability is key. You got to look for those opportunities to pivot the business towards scalability. Now, I do still strongly believe that when you're starting out, it really does help to validate that and find revenue. You'd be shocked how many business owners and entrepreneurs forget that seemingly very obvious thing of, you got to have revenue. You got to have customers. And we hear stories about, I'm not talking about these big VC-backed things where they could run for years with no revenue and somehow they're worth billions. I don't understand that. I don't get that. And I don't want to do that. I want to actually have a business that has customers and value, and prove that first. But you can't forget that, because if you don't have revenue, you're going to run out of money.
Now, were there any one or two things that you think were big turning points or catalysts to help you scale that, software side of the business, like customer acquisition? Were there some big things that made just a huge impact?
I think I would say that moment I described with the API, and then taking it to the point where I could allow the customers to do the entire process of finding clinics for the services that they need in an automated way, just by entering a zip code, finding that service, booking their tests, and connecting all of the dots. It goes slowly until it goes fast. Meaning, if there's 7 dots to connect: the customer, the business, the employee they want to test, the clinic they got to go to, the lab, the doctor that reviews it, our software, getting it back. You got to connect all of that. And until you connect all of it, you don't really have, you don't gain speed. But once they're finally all connected, and you put it out there in a way, in a software that's elegant enough and enjoyable enough for people to use, and understandable enough and simple enough, then all of a sudden, boom, and you go from, maybe 10%. I think I went from 10% online orders to 50% within a year. That was, all of a sudden you say, okay, this is some data I could sink my teeth into and say, wow, it really made a change. Now let's get it to 75%. Now let's invest in marketing online to get more people because we know it works. So you can put good money behind good money rather than keep chasing, losses.
Curious, Jared, to hear a little bit about, as you said, you kind of dove in to learn the technology side of things. What did your network look like of people that you leaned on as you dove into this venture? Did you have mentors or, colleagues or people that you reached out to for insights and feedback and thoughts? What does that look like?
I think the mentors that I had were the people that I learned from before I started the business. When speaking about business mentors, right? Most people in my personal life thought I was crazy, and you get a lot of resistance when you're starting your own business because people bring their own emotions to the conversation, or they, it just usually sounds crazy. Hey, I'm going to start a company. It's going to be as big as Shopify. Yeah, right. But it's so and because there are a lot of examples of people who say that and go belly up, and I certainly had my experiences where I started things that didn't work, so people resist it, I think, and so there's a lot of emotional stuff that goes on as an entrepreneur, and there's a lot of things you got to work through. Mentors on the tech side, I think the best thing I did was look for people that were involved with the software that I had chose as the platform, and from there learn from them. And so even the people that I hired became mentors in terms of the technology. One thing that I didn't do, which I realized 8-9 years later, is that there was a whole community of people around that technology that I could have tapped into. So I would encourage people to do that. Look into the communities of people that use the software, because they're very giving oftentimes, and they're very willing to provide knowledge that they have. They're willing to share it. People like to share knowledge often, and that helps you a lot. So I did a lot of researching the boards, and ultimately found the community where there are people that are willing to put stuff out there on podcasts and videos explaining how to use and learn and grow with the tech.
You mentioned a couple of times, talking about your prior ventures. You sound like a bit of a serial entrepreneur, which is exciting and it's great. I would love to hear, what are some of the lessons that you learned from other businesses that maybe didn't succeed the way you would hope they would, and how have you taken that, what you've learned, to be useful with STAFFGLASS?
I would say one of the biggest things is this issue of thinking what the customer is going to want and how important little things are, and stripping away all of the things that are not part of that MVP, that are not part of what's required to learn more from the customer. And it's really hard. And you get into this issue of over optimization too early on that costs too much, and you just run out of time and or money, or both. And I would just say, you think but you don't know. You have an idea, get the product out, and get out of your mind all of the things that are adding time to the dev cycle before you get it out there. Get it out there, learn from the customer, because it might be a completely different feedback that you're getting from them versus what you thought. And when you thought that, this button was going to be the most important thing for them, and they don't care about that button, maybe they don't care about the product at all, and which you better learn that quicker than later. But it's really hard. It's much easier said than done. And you really don't want to run out of time and money before you launch, because that's really frustrating. Then you never get to even know if there's going to be value there.
Yeah, we actually just talked to a founder, I think, on another show recently, where we talked about the 20-year overnight success, where everybody kind of sees, the win, and you've gotten here, but they don't see all the sludge that you had to go through to get there. Yes. I'm kind of curious, and it sounds like you've started businesses and some of them haven't worked. What do you think about failure? Because there's some people that are like afraid to fail.
Yep. I've heard this story that, on the East Coast where I'm in New York, people the failure is not, people look down on it, and then in Silicon Valley it's a badge of honor. I'm not sure that that's entirely true. I think that's maybe part myth. Failure sucks. It really does. And you have to know when you're going into business, you got to know the stats, 4 out of 5 fail in a year, 9 out of 10 in 5 years, whatever it is. And you have to be willing to know that if that happens, you can't crawl up in the fetal position and not get out of bed. You got to figure out, all right, what am I going to do next? For me, at one point, I went back to work. I had been in corporate world. I was a CEO of a division of a publicly traded company for a while, and ran national marketing and sales. But I never was fully satisfied. I just knew I had to be on my own. And I tried it, and I blew all the money I saved and went back to work, and had to do it. I had to feed my kids, right? But I knew in the pit of my heart that I had to be on my own, and I just said, all right, I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to eat rice and beans every night until this thing makes money, because it's so important to me personally that I achieve. There's a few things you can do in this life that radically change your circumstances in life and your view of yourself and people's view, all kinds of things. And starting a business is really one of them. And if you fit, you have to understand that there's a good chance of failure. And what does that mean? Does that mean you're a failure? Does that mean it was just a step in your learning process? And you got to take heart in stories like Hershey, who failed, 10 times before he invented the chocolate bar, or whatever the story is. You really have to believe in that stuff. On the other hand, you have to, it's not all just dreaming and believing, right? It's not all this emotional stuff. There has to be a business, and to describe it to other people, it's very hard, because I never want to inspire people to just follow a pipe dream. But on the other hand, maybe that's kind of what I did. But I feel like there has to be some rationality, some logic, and there's a physicality to it. You got to work your tail off, to make it happen. There's no question.
I'm kind of curious how you feel about that nature versus nurture piece of being an entrepreneur. Do you think it's something that people are kind of inherently have the traits and pieces for in them to start and grow something, or do you think they can learn and it's something that they can become?
Well, I like to say that I have natural talent at nothing, right? Everything I do, I have to bust my behind to learn. So I'm a big believer that nurture is available to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, if you're somebody that just really is afraid of not having a steady paycheck, then that's a different thing. That's I guess you could say is nature, but it's not saying you couldn't be an entrepreneur, but maybe you just don't have the risk tolerance for it, or it hasn't yet been modeled for you what that really means, right? The fact that getting out of bed is taking a risk, and really understanding it. So in terms of learning the skills, and I think, I'm a big believer that nurture is hugely important and available to you. It can be learned. You could read books on leadership, right? But there is a skill set, and yes, certainly some people are more natural at it, like anything else. But I think also, there's a social element here to it, which I would really like to mention, which is that, some folks, some communities, some economic groups, it's not modeled for them as well as maybe it might have been modeled for me. And it was modeled for me because my grandparents were entrepreneurs, and my parents, everybody in my family was in their own business, or they were a teacher. And so, I followed that path, and I had teachers in life that showed me what good leaders were, right? And so I think it's important, like what you guys are doing here, and getting the word out and modeling it for people that maybe they didn't have those role models for, because you can learn it. You gotta believe in yourself, but you can't learn it all. You can't make it up all yourself. You have to have either role models or seek out that learning.
I've been having a conversation with a couple of my, entrepreneur friends about risk tolerance. I've had my business now for almost 20 years, and this idea of risk tolerance of, you know, as you go, are you still willing to make as big of risks, or or taking risks often? Has yours changed over time, your risk tolerance, or do you feel like it's stayed the same and you're still kind of as wild cowboy as you might have been in the beginning?
It's a really great question, and it's one of the hardest parts of being in your own business, because in the beginning, in some ways, the risks are bigger, but in other ways, you have a lot less to lose. So, as you grow, the propensity to take a risk, the risks get bigger, right? So if you want to grow from 0 to 100,000, you kind of just shooting in the dark. You're risking having to go back to get a regular job. But if you're at $10 million and you're trying, to get to 11 million is not going to change your life, but to get to 30 or 40 million might. But the risk you have to take to do it is much bigger, and you could potentially put your business at risk to do that. And so it's a really hard decision at that point. So I will say, unfortunately, you have to defend your turf first. It's the only way, right? You just can't put it, because now you're putting other people's lives at risk, their livelihoods, in terms of their jobs and whatnot, if you risk the whole business. So you got to make those calls. And unfortunately, just like becoming a parent, you tend to start to mitigate, start to become a little bit more risk averse necessarily.
Yeah.
Over time.
Yeah. And I've talked about it. I started when I was 22 years old. I'm 40 now with 2 kids. And I think there's also just life circumstances that influence your, like you said, desire to put everything up, potentially the double growth versus, are you just putting a little up to have a little bit of growth? So.
Yeah, and those, they're hard decisions, but it's the excitement of being an entrepreneur, right? I mean, just making these decisions every day is a privilege, and it's exciting, and it's like, okay, now we actually do have an opportunity to double or triple or quadruple, but we got to be careful. You just can't be reckless. You got to defend your turf, because you don't want to just fall back only on what got you there. You have to risk. You have to keep taking risks, but you got to be smart.
Jared, what does your team look like?
Okay, so we have, in the last about sort of halfway through, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we brought in a tech team. It's based in Cleveland, and that's sort of the core of our software development. And then we have a manager and a call center that runs the day-to-day and takes the calls, services the clients, handles if problems come up, and tracks down specimens and stuff like that, and does sales. About half the calls are still sales calls, and the other half service calls. And the call center was growing and growing for a while until we really put in the tech. So each year they're able to do more and more with the same amount of people. And then we have very selectively picked really valuable consultants that help out in things like dev, SEO for sure is a crucial part of it, and finance.
So I'm always interested in the marketing side of things, but that's a big area for us. What did you, how did you guys look at marketing, and what kind of tactics did you use to grow the business?
Yeah, I mean, I came from a marketing background, really, and originally the way I approached it was physical. So like the RV, I painted it up. At first, I put a urine cup, cup of pee on the side, and then we started doing DNA testing. This is sort of an interesting side note, but I had come up with the slogan, "Who's your daddy?" So I put the "Who's your daddy" on the side of it. That blew up, like nothing I had ever experienced, and TV producers started calling. We were on VH1 for a season with the DNA testing. Newspaper, we were in the paper all the time. It was just madness from one slogan. It's like spent about $4,000 on paint. Hired local graffiti artists that I knew, and we did it up one weekend, and must have got millions in free marketing exposure from it. It was a real grand slam from that standpoint. But from a long-term scalability, and we still get business from that exposure and that establishment of ourselves as a authority in the DNA testing space because of all the press that came around that. The flip side was SEO, really, because I really just realized very early on that the business was coming from Google. I mean, there was just no way around it. Google was driving the business, and the ads were going to be too expensive to survive. You're going to lose money on ads. Those come in later when you could afford to invest in them because you know that in the long run you might earn money from them. But SEO was huge. So I went out and sought out firms that had credentials and expertise in SEO, and they've really been the core of our marketing strategy. I could talk all day about SEO or anything you want about that as well.
Funny, Tony painted a urine cup on his car, but he's not even in the business. So
hopefully it went better for you than me.
Yeah, I mean, I think people always struggle within marketing, like what is the right approach and channel to take. I love the come up with some ideas that are a little bit different than what other folks would do, like the tagline, some of these other things. Because right. I think too many people are timid in marketing and are afraid to scare people off. And what they do is they create no real impression because they were too mediocre and diluted.
I couldn't agree more. You can't be boring. You can't be outrageous. Sometimes you could. It depends on who you are. But it's taking risks. There was some sleepless nights. Believe me, putting "Who's Your Daddy" on the side of trucks was. I was afraid people would misinterpret it. But it was a big risk. But it worked. So yeah, you have to take those kind of risks. And you have to calculate carefully that you're not over, extending to the point where you could really cause damage to yourself. But yes, you can't just do what everybody else does. I think the holy trinity of business is you gotta have something unique, right? You have to be able to, it has to be desirable. It has to be something that people want. And you got to defend that uniqueness, right? You can't be something that people can just copy. And slogans are a part of it for sure, right? Slogans are a key part of it. And I spent a lot of time looking at the trademarks database. It's online, USPTO. And it's real interesting, just understanding what trademarks are. You learn a lot about how to market things like slogans and what's trademarkable. If you just say, my software, the software is American Express is the, a credit card, it's the best credit card. You can't trademark that, but don't leave home without it. It doesn't really say anything about credit cards. It gives you a feeling about what that is, right? So thinking about that and learning, say, how can I create a slogan that gives an impression about what we're all about what our brand is, without just spelling it out. It's challenging. And then you think of it, and then you check the trademark database, and somebody already did that one, and then you got to go back to the drawing board. That's a challenge. It's a lot of hard work you got to put in there. But if you catch the right one, it can be a real big game changer.
So I'd be curious, Jared, to hear a little bit about what is, what's coming in the next, 12 to 18 months as far as STAFFGLASS. Are you guys evolving the product and what's on the table?
Well, here's where it's at, and this might sound crazy as well, but over the last several years, we've realized in dealing with other businesses, the 20,000 clients we have, as well as our consulting firm, that we have really good technology for a small business, right? So we have a marketing platform that tracks our ads and does attribution better than almost anybody else we meet. Way better. Even friends of mine that work in big companies, and they say, wow, you can do all that? You can track an ad to a phone call and a phone call to a sale and figure out which ad works better. And, we say, yeah, we built it ourselves, and it's, and it goes on and on. Our publishing platform, we built ourselves, and in terms of web publishing, and so what our goal right now is to go beyond just giving companies the opportunity to do the onboarding and the recruiting, but to sort of put out this whole suite of business services that we've built for ourselves, including the web publishing, the SEO, and analyzing keyword density, and doing it all in an integrated fashion. I mean, the idea behind StaffGlass is an integrated employee record that you don't have to key into background check software and then a drug testing software and then e-signs. It's all in one. So the person scans their driver's license in from their phone, and the employee is off and running, and then that record powers all of those things, and that cuts down on an enormous amount of errors and double and triple work and all that. But that whole idea of integration applies to the whole business as well. Because if you're doing ad tracking in one software and you're doing inventory in another and you're doing payroll in another, and it just goes on and on. In small businesses, we're told all the time, you got to use these softwares, and some of them are great because they are. But the fact when they're segregated, it creates a burden after a while. 10 different logins, 10 different, and they don't speak to each other. And so what the power of what we've done internally is to build this system as an integrated system. So when somebody clicks an ad, the ad is tied back to the phone number, that's tied back to the client, that's tied back to the sale, and all the way through. And that's just the marketing integration. The same thing applies on the web publishing. And so the clinics that we have available are in our database, and that gets pushed directly into our website. And to have that all in one system is massively powerful. And our goal is to release iterations of StaffGlass or beyond that allow companies to take advantage of that same thing. Building it for ourselves was hard. Building it for, generically enough that people can use it on their own through the web is 10 times harder. But that's my dream. That's my goal is to put pieces out there, starting with the web publishing stuff, because that's just amazing how honestly how bad some of the folks, small business websites are. They just don't understand the technical aspects of SEO, the speed, what Google's looking for. And we can help them. We got to help. Somebody's got to push back against Amazon taking over the world, right? So that's what we're hoping to do.
To that point, have you changed your mindset about, raising money versus bootstrapping to kind of get to that next level? Or do you see trying to continue the bootstrap to get to that, bigger vision?
I wrestle with that every day. I think the ways that I've tried to get to that vision is setting up a stock option plan for the staff. So when they used to work 10 hours a day, now they want to work 12. Just getting that excitement and motivation. But, again, at some point we need resources, and you have to make that calculation. How realistic is it that we're going to get a return if we put our own money into it? Should we borrow? Should we get investors? And, the investor thing is one of those where it's only worth it if the value is such that, if the valuation of the company is such that what they're putting in really feels like it's going to change the game at a level where I'm still comfortable with my own desire to run it and own it.
You kind of touched on people, like how have you built your culture and how do you incentivize people, and what's it look like when you're trying to get people behind the vision for the business?
Yeah, well, a few different things. I mean, sales folks are sort of one flavor of it, and that's our call center. And we have always had like an incentive compensation plan that, I love working on these things. They're really hard because you have to figure out ways to incentivize people, and everybody is incentivized by different things. Some people like long-term incentives. Some people want to get a bonus every month. Some people like recognition. Some people just want money, So you got to figure out a way to do it in a way that makes sense for the business, but hits upon as many of those personal motivations as possible. But, for the business, you also have to set a culture. And I think the stock option plan is critical for incentivization because it gets everybody on the same page. When I worked in a public company, that was the thing that I learned the most, that having stock options, no matter what all the executives would argue about and people want to advocate for their position or their division over another division. But at the end of the day, what they all really wanted was for the stock to go up. And I realized, this stock option thing is a tremendously unifying methodology. So for the tech folks and for the sales staff, we have that there. I think that's critically, important for the culture. But, make no mistake about it, the people are the most important part of any company's culture. And the hiring is figuring out the right people to hire. Fire fast and hire slow. All these things are really, really important because at the end of the day, that's what your company is. It's gonna grow or fail based on the people you have there.
Yeah, no, that's great. How have you found the best people for the company? And how do you evaluate bringing on the right folks?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of less networking with people that I know than you think. I'm not a big I don't do a lot of that, like calling people I know and say, who do you know?
Mm,
But I find that asking, once you have good staff, asking them who they know can be a very powerful technique, because they already know what it's like in a very intimate way, what it's like to work for the company or to work for me, or they know the culture and they know their former colleagues and who's good at what from a work standpoint. So that's been a pretty effective way. And I'm open to anything to find to look at. There's a lot of new kind of businesses that have cropped up around the idea of vetting talent for a particular industry, and that's been effective in some cases for us. Um, and I'd say listening to podcasts and shows like this, and you hear what people say that are leading these shows that are often consultants themselves. You really get a sense of their philosophy and how they
right.
would advise and the type of shops they run. So in looking for consultants, that's been pretty effective.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Jared, I'd like to ask, so currently, do you still, Health Street, you're still running that as well?
Yes.
So with, between Staff Glass, Health Street, and then big plans on the horizon, how do you, a lot of times we like to talk about, work-life balance or work-life harmony. How do you manage the day-to-day and keeping yourself, rejuvenated and focused? What does that look like for you?
Well, I'm exercise every day. Exercise is non-negotiable, so I work out every morning. That's critical to sort of level setting your whole mind and body and spirit to face the day and sit down at the computer again, because you can really face burnout, especially if you're just looking at code all day. It can drive you nuts. And yeah, just remembering when my kids call that I can't talk to them while I'm looking at the screen, because that's you're not going to be present in the conversation. And even though they're looking at the screen most of the time, they're going to figure out if you're looking at one too, and they're not going to like that. So making sure you make the time, and working from home I resisted that during the pandemic until much later on. Part of it was getting a reliable connection that was fast enough to work from home, but once I finally jumped into that, yeah, that definitely freed up an hour or so from the commute, and I've lately embraced it. I'm not sure if I'll stick with it, but that's helped a little bit too, to get some time with the family.
How did the pandemic affect your business?
Well, putting people from the call center into the homes was really scary, because I just figured, all right, it's phones. They can't, it's not going to work when we send them home. But amazingly, we worked it out. We went through some challenges. We had to, half the staff didn't have internet at home. We had to go out there and set them up and pay for it and stuff like that. And, there's issues, but with connections mostly. A lot of it is internet stuff. But when the main office went down before, or we had two offices, just for sort of balancing out the load. If one of them went down, half your staff was down. Now, if one of them goes down, 10% of my staff is down. So in some ways, it's better, right? Because you don't have that vulnerability, that fragility you have if everybody's on one network connection. The downside of it is it's very hard to train new people on a product, on how to become a salesperson something that probably takes 3 months of one. Used to sit with a manager for 3 months one-on-one. You got to do that over the phone. You got to figure out different ways. It forces you to innovate, and you spend time learning that and come up with training in different ways. But I think it's ultimately can be very effective.
That's great. So I have a question that I ask every founder. If you were able to go back in time before you started, let's say, the technology business, or even, the original business, and have coffee with yourself, what's one piece of advice you would give future or, past you?
That's a great question. Future advice to past me. I think, I don't have regrets as much, so it's not like I wallow in thinking I wish I did this differently or the other thing differently. But I think, the idea of believing in yourself and the idea of gambling on yourself is critical. And as much confidence as maybe I thought I had, there's all voices in your head saying can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to, if it's in you, if that's your passion, if that's what you really want to do, you could learn it. You can go out there, you can figure it out, and you're gonna fall, and that's okay. There's a something that I told when I first brought in the CFO, that he looked at me like I was out of my mind, but I realized it was really important that I wish I had done this earlier, which is that the part of running your own business is that it's a bit of your own art project, and it's okay if you're not Michelangelo. It's your art, right? So, and I said to him something to the effect of, sometimes it's okay if I make mistakes, because I wanted to do it. I wanted to learn how to make a website. I wanted to learn how to run an ad program. I didn't need the top expert in it. I could make mistakes, but I did it and I learned from it. And he thought I was out of my mind. And I think at a certain point, yeah, that is a crazy way to run a business, because you got too much at stake and other people relying on you. But I think that's good advice that I would have liked earlier on, which is, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's a reflection of yourself and your art or your work, and it's okay if it's not perfect, but it's more important that you go out and do it, and that's the value that you get out of it.
I like that a lot. And I personally, I try a lot of things because I want to have a little bit of knowledge about it if I'm gonna talk about it or hear other people talk about it, and and so I'm totally on board with that. I love it.
Yeah, there's this notion that why would you start this business when so many other people are doing it, or who's going to buy it from you when they buy it from someone else? But that in and of itself is not a reason to not do it, right? You're just like, all right, well, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it my way, and I'm going to learn it, and I'm going to make mistakes, and guess what? I'm going to get customers too, and maybe that'll grow into something, and then somewhere along the way I might innovate. If I know myself, I'm going to keep thinking, I'm going to keep saying, hey, what if we did it slightly differently? But I can't think of that beforehand because I don't know the details of the business yet. But one day a call is going to come in, and I'm going to talk to the client and say, oh, wait a second. And then it's going to turn into something. And you have to, sort of embrace that whole process if you want to do this business thing. And certainly in the way that I've done it, which is, like I say, on your own without gathering a team of investors and all that.
Right. Awesome.
Well, that's great. So, Jared, just to wrap us up here, where can people who are tuning in that want to learn more about you, about your businesses, where can they find you and learn more?
Well, we're on, we're on social media, Health Street or StaffGlass. There's emails on our website, staff@health-street.net, staffglass.io. And coming soon, the web publishing platform is going to be glasspress.io.
Very cool. Well, Jared, this has been a lot of fun. We really appreciate you taking the time out to share your story and a lot of what you've learned and some really good stuff. So thank you.
Thank you, guys.
To everyone tuning in, thank you guys for joining, and we will see you again next time.
All right, take care, guys.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks.